All right. Thanks to everybody for coming out this evening. This is my absolute favorite time of the year, and this is my favorite thing to be talking about at any time of the year. So, the course that, or the seminar that we're going to administer this evening is going to really focus on basic tactics based on conversations with Eddie and DWR. There was some significant interest and feedback to the R3 program that there really needed to be a basic course. So we're going to focus mostly on basics here this evening, try and establish some value for anyone that's watching it. But this course really is going to be tailored to people that have just gotten into hunting or are just getting into turkey hunting and want to learn more about having more positive interactions with the wild turkey. Eddie, are we having bandwidth issues?
You sound great. Your video is a little blurry, but I think with some time, maybe it'll correct itself.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Okay. I just wanted to double check and make sure that at least the audio was there.
Yeah, you sound great.
Folks, a little bit about myself. I have grown up in the state of Virginia. I'm 36, and I killed my first turkey when I was 12. Been fortunate to spend a lot of time in kind of constructing a life that really revolves around the outdoors and most specifically focused on turkeys. I've been fortunate to hunt turkeys in 41 states. I've harvested them in 38. I'm hoping to finish up my Super Slam, which is a bird in all 49 this year. I'm a member of the Mossy Oak Pro Staff. I've been fortunate to guide for some really high quality commercial operations, do a lot of philanthropy stuff with St. Jude's, Wounded Warrior, and other kids events as well. So I've tried to get a lot of experience in the turkey hunting realm, and we're going to try and bring some value based on that here today. I am a member of the Mossy Oak Pro Staff. This seminar and the next one are being conducted in partnership with Mossy Oak and DWR. I don't really know what else to say about myself other than I really like to turkey hunt. So in terms of starting this course, when I was thinking about how to format this from a basic perspective, I think it's really important for people to understand some basic things about the wild turkey. If you're going to start hunting it, we really need the most value that you can have is understanding your quarry. And when you have a basic understanding of your quarry, you can construct a more logical strategy that will yield higher results and more higher quality interactions with these animals. So just to start with the very basics, there are 5 subspecies of wild turkey in the continental United States. The easterns, which is what we will focus mostly on today because this course is being tailored to Virginia turkey hunters, and you can only find the eastern subspecies of turkey in Virginia. There are the Osceolas, which are down in central and south Florida. I actually been down there for the last 4 days chasing Osceolas. Just got back this afternoon from Florida. There are the Rios, which are in the central and dispersed kind of locally throughout the western part of the United States as well. And then you have the Merriams, which are in the southwest corner of the United States. Their indigenous range is the Arizona and New Mexico area, but Merriams populate Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, Idaho, Washington. They are very widely dispersed throughout the West, and I think that you could make a compelling argument that they live in some of the most beautiful places to chase turkeys. So those are your 5 subspecies. In terms of understanding quarry, I think the most valuable thing to understand, not to get too, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole on biology and physiology with wild turkeys, but if you're going to understand, if you're going to have quarry, you need to understand their defense mechanisms so that you can most effectively negate or exploit their defense mechanisms. And the wild turkey, its primary defense mechanism is its eyesight. And so based on the anatomical position of their eyes, they can see somewhere between 280 to 300 degrees around them. They have periscopic monocular vision, which is just really a really fancy way of saying that these birds see incredibly well. They see the full color spectrum And their normal disposition is really just to be generally paranoid because everything eats them, from birds of prey to coyotes. I mean, you name it, everything's after turkeys. And if I really can't imagine how many times something attempts to eat a wild turkey during its normal day-to-day existence, whether it's from the egg stage to the poult stage before they can fly to full maturity. There's just a lot of stuff out there that eats them, and they remain relatively paranoid as a consequence of that. So their eyesight is the thing that we want to focus on the most in terms of how to behave and how to move around wild turkeys when they are actually within eyesight. Obviously, their auditory capabilities are exceptional as well. It never fails to amaze me what a turkey can hear. Anytime you really scratch your head wondering, did the bird hear that? The answer is a resounding absolutely. So when it comes to talking about discussing hunting wild turkeys, we want to constantly remember that those visual and those auditory capabilities, and what we're trying to do is ultimately negate those so that we can successfully get or trick the bird to come into range and give us an effective and clean shot opportunity at them. In terms of the basic needs for a wild turkey, they need mature timber to roost in. Virginia offers, a wide variety of timber and habitats for wild turkeys. It doesn't matter if you're in the Tidewater, the Piedmont, the western part of the state up in the National Forest. We've got a lot of different roost variations for turkeys, whether it's pine trees, poplar trees, your hardwoods and whatnot. And turkeys are really resourceful too. I've seen them in beech trees and some dead sycamore trees as well. Not regularly, but I have seen that. So they need a place to roost. They need a water source. They need good nesting cover, and they need a place to browse and feed. Our state really has wonderful resources in terms of those offerings, and obviously we have a very robust and successful turkey population here, thanks to the efforts of formerly DGIF, now DWR, and their partnerships with the NWTF and other state and federal partners as well. So we really are blessed to have some great turkey hunting here in the state. And I want people to remember what those habitat or what those basic need attributes are in terms of how to actually find turkeys. If you're a brand new turkey hunter, you want to be looking for those things in terms of roost trees, water, grain, or some source of browse, whether it's fields with insects and whatnot. These are all key components that are going to localize turkeys on the properties that you will ultimately be hunting. In terms of the wild turkey in the spring, this course is going to focus on spring turkey hunting. There is a fall season. I do not hunt turkeys in the fall. So this will be, all of this information will be applicable to the opportunities that you're going to have in the field here in the next month and a half, starting, I think the Youth and the Apprentice Day is April 2nd. The general season opens April 9th and then runs through the middle of May. So we're talking about hunting turkeys during their breeding cycle. And in terms of understanding the breeding cycle, we really should kind of talk about how turkeys and their flock dynamics change throughout the year. So at the end of the spring, it's probably the most logical place for us to start this conversation. Turkey poults, which are babies, hatch. The hens sit on the nest for 26 to 28 days and hopefully successfully hatch a nest. Now, it's a very small percentage of hens that are actually able to get those nests to the point that they can have poults just because of natural predation. But once those poults hatch, you have baby turkeys, and those baby turkeys have to develop a muscular system that can sustain flight. So they're on the ground for anywhere from 12 to 18 days before they can sustain limited flight and start to get off the ground. And the imprinting process starts immediately from the get-go. So At the end of the spring, the gobblers start to get back together because the hens are no longer sexually receptive, or most of them are not sexually receptive unless their nest fails. And the hens go to rearing the brood, which is teaching them the things that can harm them, teaching them behaviors that are going to allow them to be successful. And so those maternal instincts kick in, and what you will see is the poults and the hens all get back together in this middle of the summer or in the end of the spring. They hang out through the rest of the summer and the fall, and that allows them to continue that imprinting process. But the larger flocks that hunters in the fall typically see are mature hens with the Jenny poults, the Jenny hens, which are less than 1 year old female turkeys, and then the Jakes, which are less than 1 year old male turkeys. So they spend the entire summer and the entire fall together imprinting so that they can raise successful baby turkeys. And then the gobblers go back off and they do their own thing in much, much smaller numbers. Now, as the winter gives way to the spring, the photo period, which is in the spring, the increase in daylight triggers hormonal changes in the wild turkey. It triggers testosterone production in the males and estrogen production in the females. And ultimately, what you'll start to see is as the testosterone increases with daylight increasing, those turkeys, those male gobblers will start to fight a lot more. You'll see them fighting amongst themselves in fields. And you will see them start to integrate into the hen flocks and start to posture, and so they establish their pecking order. And there's a complicated relationship between gobblers and hens who are willing to be receptive, sexually receptive with certain gobblers. But the hen groups start to break off and become smaller as well. And so this is what guys like me consider to be the best time of the year, because the toms start to gobble. They start to get with the hens. And this is when we will be in the woods attempting to call them in. Our season here in Virginia typically starts a couple weeks after the breeding has started. And that is by design to allow most of the hens to be successfully inseminated before the male flock, before the gobblers begin to be harvested. So our season typically starts once breeding has already begun. Those hens are becoming impregnated. Some of them are impregnated. They will lay approximately 11 to 15 eggs. It will take them 2 weeks to do that, and each of those eggs will be dropped on a 1 day period. So the hens will be bred, they'll leave the gobbler, and then they'll go to the nest and they'll deposit an egg on the nest. After they have deposited that 11 to 15 eggs, it's just an average, then they will actually start to sit on the nest, and they will sit for 26 to 28 days. And this is the most dangerous part of the spring for a hen wild turkey, because most of those hens will sit on that nest, with the exception of an hour or two every day, all day long, at night and during the day. And so they're highly susceptible to predation at that point. Very, very vulnerable to a lot of different predators when they're sitting there on the ground, especially with their just constantly depositing that scent on the nest. So some of you may be scratching your head saying, why is this guy spending so much time talking about these breeding behaviors and how all this works? I just want to know how to go call some turkeys in. Well, we would be remiss if we failed to understand where the breeding cycle is when we are choosing to hunt turkeys. So at the beginning of the spring, you have a lot of hens that haven't started to lay any eggs on the nest. You have a lot of hens that are spending a lot of time with gobblers. Gobblers are really, really vocal, and they're sorting themselves out with a lot of fighting going on. And so the tactics change at the beginning of the season versus as you start to mature in the breeding cycle, and so as a lot of those hens start to lay or lay eggs and then eventually set on the nests. Typically, the middle towards the end of the season is probably the easiest time of the year to harvest a tom, because those hens are spending considerably less time with those toms. So if you're a new turkey hunter, I would encourage you not to be frustrated if your success is lower at the beginning of the season, if turkeys aren't responding to your calls as well at the beginning of the season, because number one, you're brand new to this and you barely know what you're saying to the things. But number two, we're calling turkeys, we're calling longbeards and toms in with hen calls. And so if a longbeard or a tom has a lot of hens at the beginning of the season, he's considerably less receptive to persuasion by a turkey call. He has very little reason to come to you at that point. And so I just want to make that statement. Don't be frustrated if you're having issues getting a bird to respond to you, or actually not to respond to you, but actually to come to the call in the beginning of the season, because it's just a much more difficult time to convince a tom to do that. Now, that's not to say that there will not be gobblers out there that have been kicked out of the flock that are very, very willing and very eager to come to a call. But by and large, toms at the beginning of the season have a lot more hens and spend a lot more time with those hens than they do towards the middle or the end of the season. And so that's why a lot of times towards the end of April, end of April, early May, you'll hear a lot more gobbling in the woods, and you'll hear a lot more gobbling after those turkeys have flown down out of the roost, and they're actually gobbling more on the ground because they still are willing to breed. They still have the desire to be with a lot of hens, but those hens have other priorities that involve the nests and laying eggs at that point in time, which is why they're more susceptible to manipulation with a turkey call. I just wanted to kind of go through the basics of the breeding cycle so we could kind of always keep that in the back of our mind in terms of context when we're hunting, what's going on, and trying to be more strategic about decisions that we make in the woods based on understanding that breeding cycle. For the purposes of the basic course, I do want to go through some basic nomenclature. We've already gotten into it in terms of toms, gobblers, hens, jennies. But for people that are going to be brand new to turkey hunting this spring, a tom, a gobbler, a longbeard is just vernacular for a bird that a male bird that is older than 2. A male bird that is under the age of 2 would be considered a jake. They have much shorter beards, kind of stubby beards. Sometimes they're barely even protruding from their breast feathers. An easy way to make a distinction between a longbeard or a tom and a jake is the jakes will typically have longer tail feathers in the middle of their fans. Longbeards or toms will have parallel feathers that are completely parallel and uniform around the perimeter of their tail fan when they strut, and they'll typically have beards that are 7 inches or longer protruding off the front of their chest. In terms of female turkeys, the most common term for them is hens, and then you'll sometimes hear turkey hunters refer to a turkey as a jenny, and a jenny is just a very, very young hen. At some point, I would say a hen that's at some point between the poult status and 1 years old. I'm sure that most people attending this right now probably know this, but for those that didn't, that would be your primary vernacular for wild turkey identification in terms of gobblers, jakes, and hens and whatnot. In terms of finding turkeys, and that's really what everybody wants to do. That's the goal of this seminar, is to allow people to locate turkeys more effectively, whether it's on private or public lands. There are a lot of resources, map-related resources out there now that allow individuals to have aerial and topographic capabilities in terms of analyzing their properties in the palm of their hand. Onyx is a fantastic function for that, application for that, if you don't have it already. But when you're looking at properties, when you're looking at a piece of public land, or you're looking even at a piece of private land, habitat confluences or habitat attributes are what will concentrate turkeys on private land or public land. And what I mean by that is ridge networks, creek systems, agriculture fields, fallow fields, ponds, clear cuts, hardwood and pine edges. All of these things contribute to more successful habitats, and they are features that will concentrate turkeys. And so what I mean by that is, if you're a brand new hunter and you're looking at some of the public land offerings that Virginia has all over the state right now, one of the easiest ways or most efficient ways to identify turkeys before you've ever stepped foot on that property is to look for topographic changes, and then start to look for water, start to look for edges in terms of the aerial photography where you can see hardwoods meet pine, or hardwoods meet a clear cut, meet a pine stand. And what you want to start to do is look at these maps and start to count how many of these different features can you find in certain locations. So what I mean by that is if you just had a hardwood system, for example, with nothing else around it, no water around it or whatnot, that probably wouldn't be the most prioritized or the most desirable place for you to immediately go and look for turkeys. What you might want to look for is a ridge system that has multiple spines coming off of it, a creek system in the bottom of it. On the other side of that creek system, you can see some fields, whether they're agriculture fields or pasture fields or a clear cut. This is what I mean by aggregating habitat confluences or different habitat features, because turkeys, just like whitetail deer and a variety of other species across North America, are edge animals. And the reason that turkeys will concentrate around those habitat confluences or those edges is because typically edges are where different amounts of sunlight hit the ground. You may have a pine thicket, or you may have a CRP field that's been pulled out of agriculture and it's sitting in fallow. And that field may offer, for example, better nesting for the hens or better brood habitat for the poults. So the hens really want to be there. And then the hardwoods right next to it would offer excellent roost opportunities for those hens, and correspondingly the gobblers that want to be around those hens as well. So these edges and these habitat confluences offer different benefits to the turkeys, and that's really why they're there. So it doesn't matter if you're hunting the back 40, the back 25, a 10-acre piece of ground or a 20-acre piece of ground in Fairfax County, or whether you're looking at thousands of acres in the George Washington National Forest. This is really the way that guys like myself, who spend a lot of time going to places they've never been before, start looking at maps and put ourselves in places where we have a higher likelihood to encounter turkeys and encounter them more quickly. It really makes these applications like Onyx and Hunt Stand, Onyx is definitely my favorite, allow you to drop pins on these locations so that you can be highly efficient as soon as you hit the ground. For Virginia turkey hunters, if you live in the central part of the state or the southeast part of the state, the southwest part of the state, you have very, very easy access to an abundance of public land opportunities. If you're a Northern Virginia turkey hunter or someone who lives in Northern Virginia, public land access is a much more challenging thing. So e-scouting or utilizing these apps and these internet functions really will save you a considerable amount of time when you actually get the opportunity to go to a particular public piece that may be an hour and a half, 2.5, or 4 hours away. These applications allow you to identify areas of interest for you, or areas that look desirable for turkeys, and they allow you to key in on them quickly to maximize your time and your effectiveness when you have the opportunity to finally go down there and scout, or if you're just going down there for the first time, you've never seen it before, to actually go hunting. I've got to tell you, in terms of e-scouting, if you're brand new at it, it's going to be a little bit difficult. There's going to be a learning curve with e-scouting, and I don't want to give the false impression that you can just go around and drop a bunch of pins on a map and you're immediately going to be into turkeys. There is an element of, you do have to spend time going to these places. You are going to experience some failure at some point as well, but the only way to get the experience and the only way to become good at it is I think there was a friend of mine that said, man, as soon as you start getting to failing, you really start getting to learning. So failure is just part of it in terms of maybe you're not hearing turkeys, but I would still say that even if you don't hear turkeys, you get to spend a good day in the woods, and you're one step closer to finding turkeys, because if the areas that you have identified were unproductive, you now know where turkeys aren't, and you don't need to be spending any more of your time there. In terms of locating turkeys, the easiest way to do that is obviously going to be going and spending time in the woods. There's absolutely no substitute for time in the woods. There's no substitute for listening to turkeys. Not only listening to them in terms of confirming that they're present in the areas that you're interested, but also listening to the dynamics in terms of, are gobblers gobbling at each other? Are hens really vocal? Is there one particular bird that when he gobbles, every other gobbler in the flock just completely shuts down and the place goes silent? There's no substitute for going to public land or going to your private land, 2 or 3 weeks before the season and starting to listen and confirm that the turkeys are in the areas that you've identified on a map that may be productive. And once you've identified that those birds are there, then you can start to learn more by going into the woods, looking at the roost sites, after the turkeys have left, identifying exactly where they were roosting, going in there and looking at the habitat features, looking at the grade, the topography, looking at the whether there's thickets in there, whether you're talking about open hardwoods, and just gaining a more comprehensive understanding of the environment that those birds are living in, and then starting to think about, how would you effectively hunt them? How would you effectively get to that location without spooking the birds in the dark? How would you effectively maneuver on turkeys in those locations? And these are just experiences that you cannot have any other way other than spending time in the woods and starting to think about this. In addition to turkeys gobbling on their own or hearing hen talk, by actually going and listening for turkeys, there are locator calls that are really popular with a variety, or with a lot of turkey hunters. A crow call can be had at any sporting goods retailer, whether it's Cabela's, Bass Pro Shops, any local sporting goods store in your immediate area. And I'd always encourage you to buy local. If you can. There are owl hooters that are out there as well, and turkeys will shock gobble to a crow call, to owl calls, to coyote calls, and you don't want to use these calls irresponsibly by constantly blasting turkeys with a locator call, but they can be highly effective if turkeys have become quiet and you're trying to move around through your properties, by occasionally blowing on a locator call to get turkeys to disclose their presence. If you can't get there at by 6 o'clock in the morning to listen, you can still go and walk through those areas and occasionally blow a locator call and get a gobbler to sound off and just confirm that he's in the immediate area. I would encourage everyone to use those calls judiciously, and try and use them in a way that would be consistent with nature. I mean, you very rarely hear owls just constantly going off during the middle of the day. You don't hear crows just back to back to back to back to back going off. So just kind of keep a mindset that allows you and your behavior to be consistent with the way that other wild animals would be behaving. I think that kind of covers the locating turkeys on public and private land in a concise manner. If anyone has any additional, more specific or targeted questions, please don't hesitate to throw those in the chat box, and we can address them more specifically or more situationally at the end of this during the Q&A. But really what I want everyone to take from that conversation is, in order to find turkeys, you want to be looking for lots of different habitat features. My favorite is if I can find 5 different converging habitat features in one place. At the minimum, I'm looking for 3. But once again, to reiterate what I mean by different habitat features, when you're looking at a map, you can clearly see hardwoods. Hardwoods would be one habitat feature. You can clearly see pine trees on a map. In terms of an aerial map, they're green and they're a lot tighter. You can see creek networks very easily on topo maps, agriculture fields, pasture fields, CRP fields, which would be fallow fields essentially. They are all very, very distinguishable. Map, if you have flat land that meets more contoured ground, that would be a habitat feature as well. If you had a clear cut that would be another habitat feature. And so once again, those are the things that I am specifically looking for, and the turkey hunters are specifically looking for. And the more of those things, the more of those habitat features that you have in one particular area, or all converging essentially, the higher the likelihood that you will find wild turkeys in those particular areas. So it's not quantum physics. It can be a little bit difficult when you're initially starting to do it, but Google is a great resource if you have never really looked at an aerial or a topo map in terms of trying to identify key features or what they look like. You can literally go into Google and you can type in what do hardwoods look like on an aerial map, or you can type in what do pines look like on an aerial map. And you can start to learn what these things actually specifically look like, so that when you're looking at a map, you have a very, very accurate perspective on that map itself. I see some additional questions coming in. Like I said, we will address those specifically towards the end of the seminar. In terms of camouflage and basic gear. So I really want to keep this simple for the basic and the brand new population. You do not have to go out and spend a lot of money to have the necessary gear to be able to go turkey hunting on the apprentice weekend, which would be April 2nd, or on the opening weekend, April 9th. There's a lot of apparel and there's a lot of gear out there that is extremely economically priced. Even now with inflation, single shot shotguns. If you don't have a shotgun yet, Stevens makes a 301 that's literally $200. It's a 20 gauge. They make a 12 gauge, a 20 gauge, and a 410. If you already have a 12 gauge, most people are familiar with the Remington 870. If you've kind of got grandpa's gun, that gun is more than sufficient to take to the turkey woods this spring, as long as you do some patterning and make sure that it's shooting in the desirable, or I should say, to point of aim, true point of aim and point of impact. So we'll start with camouflage. At the beginning of this seminar, we started discussing that the turkey's visual capabilities are its primary defense mechanism, and there are a lot of turkey hunters out there that will just say that you can put on blue jeans and call turkeys in and kill some turkeys, and that's true. You absolutely can, but if you're trying to be prepared and we want to maximize the opportunity for success, camouflage is an imperative part of turkey hunting, because quite honestly, if a hen turkey were to come in before a gobbler were to come in and you were sitting there in blue jeans, you're going to be seen at some point by the hen before the gobbler would ever get there, and you would lose the opportunity to harvest that tom because you weren't wearing camouflage or hadn't stayed concealed for a necessary amount of time for that tom to come in and finish. So those of us that are chasing turkeys all over the place, really try and tailor our camouflage selections to the environment that we're going to be hunting. Obviously, I represent Mossy Oak. That is a company that was founded with turkey hunting at its primary, at the core of its its ethos. So the most popular pattern for wild turkeys in America by far is Mossy Oak Bottomland, and I would wear this camouflage even if I wasn't affiliated with Mossy Oak, because it blends so well in pine habitat, in poplar habitat, in hardwoods. It really just has a tremendous amount of versatility, because when light gets on it, it grays up, and when shadows get on it, it gets a lot darker, which is what happens to timber in the woods. So when the season starts, I tend to wear camouflage that is basically more barren. And you don't see a lot of green vegetation in the Virginia woods around April 2nd for that youth and apprentice weekend. Occasionally around the opening weekend, we're a little greener than we normally are. But by and large, when you're walking through Virginia woods or Virginia turkey habitat on the opening weekend, you're not going to see a lot of green vegetation, but you are going to see a lot of barren trees. And so my camouflage selection earlier in the season reflects that. And I go with the bottomland pattern because it blends in with the hardwoods and it blends in with the pines, and I can pretty much go anywhere in the state that time of the year and I can have high quality camouflage that's going to do the job. I did see a question. It was probably someone that had attended, joined in late. Yes, turkeys see in the full color spectrum. And so, like I said, I modify my camouflage selections as the canopy or as the vegetation starts to mature. I start to integrate more greens into my camouflage selection. I'll blend mossy oak bottomland, which looks like a tree trunk, with greener pants, like a mossy oak obsession, for example. There's a lot more green in that pattern, and so it lets my legs look like they've got vegetation on them while my upper body blends in better with the tree. Regardless of which camouflage company or camouflage you select, you just want to be aware of the fact that you want to be wearing camouflage that's going to most effectively conceal you in the environment that you're in. And once again, I would wear Mossy Oak even if I wasn't affiliated with Mossy Oak. I think I was wearing it for 20 years before I became affiliated with the company, just because there were so many varieties of offerings that allowed me to tailor what I was wearing on a daily basis to where I was going to be hunting. And the confidence that you are well concealed is an important thing to have when you're dealing with a bird that sees 300 degrees and has full color spectrum visual capability and is perpetually terrified of essentially everything that's around it. When it comes to camouflage and wild turkey visual acuity, I would really be doing everyone an injustice here today if I was not talking about movement. Most people that are new to hunting or just coming into hunting maybe they've been deer hunting, or maybe they've watched some social media content and they've been told move slowly or minimize movement. When we're talking about movement around wild turkeys, we're talking about a different degree of stillness. The wild turkey and its visual acuity is truly a fascinating thing. I have seen turkeys pick off people walking in the woods. A turkey would be out in the field at 400 yards, 500 yards, and somebody stands up and starts to walk, and that bird will pick up on that movement. So when we're talking about calling turkeys and we're talking about being around turkeys, stillness is probably the most important attribute beyond being well concealed. And stillness it just has a brand new definition to it when we're talking about being around the wild turkey. When I'm talking about being motionless, I am really talking about having imperceptible movements while you're around these birds. I'm talking about movement that is so slow that would truly be imperceptible to them. And it's really hard to appreciate how quickly they will pick up any form of abrupt movement until you've actually seen them do it. So for anyone here that has never been turkey hunting, that's going to go to the spring turkey woods this spring, I just really want to stress how critical it is to be ready once you think that turkey is coming. And then once the turkey is within eyesight, or should be within eyesight, have a high degree of consciousness in terms of your stillness to prevent that bird seeing you before you actually get a shot opportunity at him. I can see some questions coming in. I'm not ignoring them, but we will address them on the back end of the seminar. I'm just trying to be efficient with everyone's time for an hour-and-a-half seminar. I think we're already 40 minutes into this thing, and I just want to hit most of the talking points that we had publicized in terms of the seminar itself. So we addressed camouflage. I would like to talk about gear. Being comfortable in the turkey woods is an important thing. If you're more comfortable, you'll be more still. If you're more still, you'll be more successful in terms of interacting with turkeys and not being seen. But there is a lot of gear out there that's highly specialized for turkeys, and you can make the budget as extensive as you like. You can go to Walmart and get a $20 turkey vest. You can get a backpack to throw turkey calls in. But in terms of gear, some of the things that you're going to want to take to the woods with you will be some type of backpack or some type of turkey vest to carry your calls. You may want to have a thermocell, which is a device. If you don't know what that is, it's a device that runs off of butane and pre-soaked pads that repels mosquitoes. If you hunt around the swamps of Virginia, you already know what that is. But they're just things that you're going to want to take to the woods with you to make your experience higher quality. Obviously, turkey calls. You're going to want gloves to cover your whatever color your hands are. To cover that, you're going to want a face mask to cover your face as well. You're going to want a seat. And there are lots of odds and ends and knickknacks in terms of snacks, water bottles, knives, obviously the variety of calls that are out there, your hunting licenses. So as these things that you're going to take to the woods start to accumulate, what you start to realize is you got to find a way to efficiently carry them. So there's the backpack opportunity. And then there are turkey vests. You can find turkey vests at Walmart, Bass Pro Shops, I think probably for less than $50 these days. You can find them as expensive as $200. Some people like to take the kitchen sink with them to the woods. Some people are minimalists. There are a lot of different offerings, but in terms of imperative or the most critical gear that you're going to want, you absolutely need a face mask. You absolutely need some gloves. You'll already have camouflage on. You're going to need some turkey calls, and you're going to want some snacks or something to be able to take a drink with you into the woods if you're going to be covering ground, looking or hunting turkeys. I'll show you guys very quickly some turkey vests and kind of what I'm talking about here. Give me just a second. This is the Nomad turkey vest, and it's one that I run. Obviously, there's a lot of different features on this vest: thermocell container, box call pocket, striker pockets for different strikers for pot calls. I've got a mouth call holder tied to it, and then I've got a pot call holder tied right here as well. This vest allows me to carry my hunting license right here. There are a bunch of internal pockets on it as well for any odds and ends. I also, in terms of gear, I'm a huge proponent of always having clippers so that you can cut any small branches or vines that are going to cause shooting related issues based on where the bird is. You're going to want to have clippers with you. You may want to have, I also carry a tourniquet with me as well, just for a worst case scenario. You may want to have a small handsaw for any trees that are larger if you wanted to build a blind. There's just a lot of different things that turkey hunters become affectionate for or develop a preference for, and a lot of different ways to carry them. This is another offering. It's a minimalist offering from Nomad. It's got a padded back seat, a couple pockets in terms of box call pockets and pot call pockets, but there's lots of different offerings out there. But you're going to want to have something at the minimum, a backpack to make sure you can get that gear in and out of the woods with you. And most importantly for me, that butt pad on the back of a turkey vest just makes life a lot easier in terms of being able to sit still. So you can go to Walmart, Bass Pro Shops. You can look at any Mossy Oak has a lot of licensees that are building some incredible turkey vests. The Nomad Outdoor Group, Banded Brands, and then Old Tom is making a phenomenal vest right now as well. Obviously, you can get into some more expensive stuff, but for the basic guy, a $25 turkey vest will probably go a long way, just making sure that you've got some type of butt seat and something to carry some turkey calls efficiently. In terms of boots, there's a lot of rubber boot offerings out there. Lacrosse Granges are my favorite. They've got a really tight heel cup so that your foot is not constantly sliding in and out and causing friction or blisters. There are snake boot offerings out there that lace up to your knees. They're great for snake country, and they provide a lot of ankle support. There's countless hiking boot offerings out there as well. I do want to discuss ticks and the Lyme disease issue and Rocky Mountain spotted fever issue in terms of boot and clothing selection. I really like boots, whether it's a knee-high boot, lace-up boots, or rubber boots that I can tuck my pants into to prevent tick access. If you're going to wear hiking boots with longer pants, gaiters are a really good choice to minimize the access points for ticks, chiggers, any other type of biting insect to get access to your legs. Permethrin sprays are out there, and I'm a huge advocate of guys doing stuff just to protect themselves from ticks, because Lyme's disease is a very real thing. It's impacted a lot of people's health in some significantly negative ways, and there's just no way to spend time in the spring turkey woods and not be around ticks. So it should be a conscious thing that you're considering when you're looking at the possibility for ticks and biting insects to gain access between your footwear and your pants. There's a lot of different, back to the boot thing, there's a lot of different tread patterns that are offered out there, and I would encourage people, depending on what part of the state you're in, to make a decision based on how aggressive of a tread you need, as dictated by how aggressive the terrain that you'll be hunting is. I know some of those guys down in the southwest part of the state are into some stuff that's almost vertical, so an aggressive tread pattern is probably more warranted there than it would be for a guy like me running around out here in the horse country, or in the central part of the state, or the far eastern part of the state. The gun offerings that are out there, I had mentioned earlier that you don't have to spend an arm and a leg on guns. The Savage 301 is a fantastic single shot shotgun if you're just looking to get into turkey hunting. It's offered in the 410, the 20, and the 12 gauge. There's some other single shot offerings out there by Yieldies. They make a fine gun for this application as well. They also make some over-under offerings. There are pump guns that can be acquired in the sub $500 range if you don't already have a pump 12 gauge or a pump 12 gauge or a pump 20 gauge. And then obviously we need to talk about shot when it comes to turkey guns as well. I do want to show some sight offerings that people should be probably be considering when we're talking about turkey guns, because it's really important to pattern these guns and make sure that once you've screwed in a turkey choke, or once you've gone and bought some heavy shot or some TSS or lead, whatever your preference is for shells, it's really important to shoot that gun with those shells and with that choke to make sure that that gun is actually impacting where you're aiming. There are a lot of fiber optic sight offerings out there that can be attached to the rails of your shotgun. So I'm going to grab a couple shotguns here right now and show what I'm talking about. So in terms of fiber optic offerings, these Williams fire sights just screw into the top screw on. They clamp onto the top of my barrel with screws on either side. There's a rear aperture on this sight that has green fiber optics, and there's an orange fiber optic that aligns up in the middle there. The rear aperture can be adjusted. This is a rear aperture. It can be adjusted left or right and up and down to ensure that my gun is shooting true. There is the red dot offerings, which have become really, really popular these days. This is a Burris Fastfire 3. It's mounted on a Sumtoy low profile mount. Obviously, the red dot offering allows a lot of precision and allows you to make sure that you definitely are hitting where you're aiming when it comes to patterning with these guns. Beads on turkey guns are fine if the gun is shooting true to its point of aim. But what you'll find with a lot of turkey chokes, which will be extra full or full chokes, is that they just don't actually shoot to the point of aim. You may have a 4 or 5 or 6 inches variation between where you're aiming and where the pattern is hitting, which is what has created the need for red dot optics or fiber optic optics on a turkey gun. You may have a gun that just has beads and shoots completely straight to those beads, and if you do, that's great. More power to you. You don't have to spend any more money. But if you don't, have a gun that's shooting exactly where you're pointing, we have an ethical obligation to these birds to not be playing Kentucky windage games, and making sure that when we put the sight on the bird, that we are not having to make last minute adjustments or guesses in terms of exactly where that pattern is going to hit. Turkeys have a really tough life. They are a grand bird, and they certainly deserve every effort to make sure that these guns are shooting straight, and that when you're making an attempt to kill them, you're going to do it in an ethical and a really, really swift way, which is why patterning before the season is so important. In terms of shot sizes and shot options for turkey guns, there is lead, there is heavy shot, and then there's TSS is probably the most popular shot material these days. I prefer TSS because it has really high density, it has small surface area, and there's a lot of pellets. I personally shoot TSS straight 9s out of most of my guns. My son, out of his little 410, shoots straight 10s. You can have TSS through commercial offerings right now from Apex Ammunition, TSS Shot. Federal makes some loads as well. And there are some small TSS in-house shops that have sprung up here in the last 6 months or so that are custom loading Foxtrot ammunition. They're all licensed through ATF, but they're doing custom loads as well with TSS. You can typically find it in 7.5s, 8s, 9s, and some people are loading the 10s. 9s are the most efficient shot size out there when it comes to tungsten or TSS, tungsten super shot. In terms of more traditional turkey gun or turkey shot sizes, in terms of lead or heavy shot, you'll find those shot materials in number 4s, number 5s, or number 6s. Before I transitioned from, or when I transitioned from lead to heavy shot, I was a lead 5 guy, and then I went to heavy shot 6s. I personally don't prefer 4s because there's just so few pellets in that pattern. I'm a 5. If I was shooting that for my gun, if I was a new person that was setting up a gun, I would, and I was convinced to shoot lead, I would be shooting probably the Winchester XR Longbeard number 6s or the heavy shot straight number 6s as well. But there's a lot of offerings out there. At the end of the day, I would encourage everybody to buy a couple boxes of shells in different sizes, go to the range, and shoot your gun at 10, 20, 30, and 40 yards to make sure that there are not any point of aim or point of impact issues with those guns, and ultimately to count the patterns to ensure that you're shooting the best load for your particular gun. When it comes to patterning these shotguns, I always encourage everybody to go to Walmart or take the newspaper that's getting delivered and put a big thing of wrapping paper or a big piece of newspaper up and shoot at a target or a dot in the center of that piece of paper so that you can fully understand and fully see exactly what that pattern is doing. Excuse me. If you're only to shoot at like an 8x10 piece of paper, there's a good chance that part of your pattern might be off that paper and you wouldn't gain a full perspective of what actually is going on. So the larger the target, the larger the surface area of the target will really give you a more accurate perspective and a better understanding of how that pattern is performing and is that pattern actually shooting to your point of aim, and ultimately allow you to make the necessary adjustments from there. Most turkey loads these days, in terms of tungsten or heavy shot, even lead, we're talking about maximum effective and ethical ranges in that 40, 45, maybe 50 yards. But if you're a brand new turkey hunter, I really would like to reinforce that the goal is to get the turkey inside, or I should say the goal is to get the turkey at close range. The goal is not to be shooting turkeys at long range. Everybody's going to have a judgment error at some point in their turkey hunting career. And you want to make sure you've got a gun that can accommodate that error when it does happen. But I would encourage everyone to be looking at the effectiveness of their pattern or the number of pellets that are in a 10-inch circle at the 40 and 45 yard range, maybe 50 if you're shooting tungsten. Most turkey hunters will have some type of extra full choke screwed into their gun. If you're shooting a 12 gauge, you will be looking for constrictions or tightnesses for these chokes in the 660 to 680 range. That's the diameter of the choke. If you're shooting a 20 gauge, most guys putting aftermarket or extra full or turkey chokes in their 20 gauges will be shooting somewhere in the 555 diameter to 575 diameter in a 20 gauge. And most of the 410s that are offered out there today are coming with more than a very sufficient extra full chokes. You probably don't need an extra full choke for a 410 offering. We could talk guns all day and shot sizes all day, so I'm kind of going to defer once again any questions on that to the post seminar. But in terms of calls, I really want to spend some time talking about the various turkey calls that are out there, the different calling platforms, and the different sounds and really what they mean. If you have watched any form of turkey hunting social media, you will inevitably have encountered a diaphragm call or a mouth call. They make a variety of these in terms of the number of reeds that are on these calls, the thickness of those reeds, and the tape, which is what's actually around the frame of the call, the size of that tape. In terms of brand new turkey hunters, or for brand new turkey hunters, I would encourage those of you that are brand new, are going to be working on a mouth call this year, to go with a call that has 1 or 2 reeds. It'll allow you to run on lighter air. You won't feel like you're trying to blow your lungs out to get sound out of that call. But it's an easier call to start to get the basic sounds of a turkey call, a basic yelp, or a basic cutout of, as opposed to a diaphragm call that may have 3, 4, or a 5 reed call. There are also pot calls. I'm going to go grab a couple of my calls real fast, just so I can show you guys what the rest of these call platforms look like. And then we're going to take a couple minutes and actually run these calls. And I'm going to show you what the basic turkey vocabulary sound like when they come off of these platforms. So give me just a second here to grab these calls I've laid out. So for brand new turkey hunters, the easiest call to pick up and develop basic skills on is going to be your box call. You can find box calls at Walmart. You can find box calls at any retailer. You can find them at any sporting goods shop in your small town. There are different styles of box calls. I'm not going to get into the specifics in terms of how they're built and how that build determines what category they fall in. But at the end of the day, a box call has a paddle and it has a base with a sound chamber inside of it, which is right here. That would be the sound chamber. It runs off of basic friction. The paddle encounters the lip of the call, and you can produce basic turkey sounds off of it. This absolutely is the easiest call for anyone to go spend $25 or $30 on at their Cabela's or their Bass Pro Shops and go call up turkeys this spring. We'll get back to box calls and the sounds here in just a second. This is called a slate call. Slate call is a form of pot call. And so this is the pot right here that the calling surface sits in. This pot call just happens to be slate. Now, sometimes people call pot calls slate calls, even if there's different material in them to make sounds. But pot calls are offered with slate, they're offered with crystal, they're offered with glass, they're offered with ceramic calling surfaces, they're offered with aluminum calling surface as well. But if you're a brand new turkey hunter, one of the least finicky and easiest surfaces to work with is a slate surface. So you'll have a striker. That striker will be held at a certain angle to create sounds off the top of that call. But quite honestly, these are the three most common turkey call platforms that you will see and that are being used by turkey hunters in the field today. There are a lot of other different types out there, but for the purposes of a basic introduction course to turkey hunting, my suggestion to anyone that's looking to go afield this spring at the minimum is just to go grab a $25 or a $30 box call. You can spend more than that if you want, but if you're looking to minimize cost, you can go grab one of those or borrow one from somebody, and you can be in the game very, very quickly. So once again, pot calls, box calls, and mouth calls. All these calls offer different benefits. Some have more disadvantages than others. But when it comes to these calls, we should probably get into discussing vocalizations. So we've talked about turkeys and their basic defense mechanisms. We have talked about how to find turkeys, or the different habitat features that turkeys like to spend time in, and how someone that is brand new to turkey hunting can start looking at maps and find them on a variety of public land or private land offerings that they have been able to secure access to. We've talked about the gear that you're going to want to take to the woods in terms of camouflage pants, camouflage shirt, head nets, gloves, camouflage hat, boots, a shotgun. But if you really want to call turkeys, you're going to need to understand basic turkey vocalizations. Now, I'm not convinced that turkey hunters, or any of us, quite honestly, fully understand the turkey vocabulary. We certainly impersonate turkeys, and we definitely have some clues in terms of what vocalizations mean, but communicating with turkeys is speaking a language. It's just like having a conversation with a colleague at work, having a conversation with your spouse. You want to get to the point where you can have a contextually appropriate conversation with these animals. And you want to be thinking about what you're saying to them. So when it comes to basic turkey sounds, the most basic sound that everyone has heard or is most notable in the turkey vocabulary, and I'll do this on a box call, is the basic yelp. So here's what a yelp sounds like on a turkey call or on a box call. Did we have any sound issues with that? Could everybody hear that clearly?
Yeah, that came through good.
Perfect. All right. So that was a basic 4 or 5 note yelp on a box call right there. Turkeys yelp regularly. It's a hey, I'm over here, hey, come over here type of call. The yelp itself has different meanings based on the speed, based on the cadence, and turkeys certainly vary the intensity of their calls, just like human beings do during different types of conversations. But a basic yelp and being able to duplicate a basic yelp is a really important thing in terms of being able to call a turkey in. You'll hear hens yelp to gobblers regularly throughout the spring. You'll hear turkeys that are close to each other yelp to each other. You'll hear turkeys that are asking other turkeys to come to them utilize the yelp. But the yelp is an important call to be able to make. And once again, the easiest way for a basic turkey hunter or a brand new turkey hunter to do it is on a box call. Super simple. Just run that call across the top of that lip, or that paddle across the top of that lip, and you'll get a that would be a basic yelp. Now, turkeys do things called tree yelps. They do things called assembly yelps. And if you spend a lot of time close to turkeys in the roost, which is up in the tree where they're at in the mornings when you will start your hunt, turkeys will start to wake up with what what turkey hunters have labeled tree yelps, which are very nasally, a little bit coarse, a little bit slower yelps. And it's just like a human being, essentially waking up in the morning. Your vocals are not at peak performance as soon as you roll out of the bed. So I'm going to take a mouth call right here, and I'm going to show you what a tree yelp sounds like. It should be very quiet. It should be slower. And this is just what turkeys do when they're starting to wake up on the limb of the tree. Give me just a second here. So here's a tree yelp. It's very quiet. It's very slow. And that is, if you spend time close to turkeys on the roost, there's a lot of that goes on. It just really can't be heard beyond about 40 or 50 yards. So that would be a tree yelp. There's a thing called an assembly yelp that lead hens or hens that have responsibilities in maintaining the flock will make, and it's a longer set of yelps. It intensifies over the course of the yelp sequence. It's not a call that you hear very, very frequently in the spring, but the purpose of this is to cover these vocalizations and give you guys some context in terms of what these calls mean, so that hopefully when you go to the field this spring, you can identify when these specific calls might be more appropriate, or more importantly, when they would be completely inappropriate. So this is I'll do an assembly yelp on this mouth call since I got it out. My kids are in bed right now, so I won't go on and on with that, but it's a faster, higher pitched yelp, and it tends to intensify as the sequence goes on. So those are your basic yelps. But in terms of a guy going to the woods this spring and encountering a turkey on the roost, obviously a tree yelp would be an appropriate thing to do once or twice. And in terms of yelping at turkeys, gobbling turkey on the ground when you're in the middle of your hunt, and a very appropriate thing to do would be your basic 3, 4, 5, 6 note yelp. Just like that. We don't want to get crazy with it. We don't want to get carried away. We don't want to say too much in that conversation, but it is important to understand when it's appropriate to use these things. And I would encourage everyone to be more sparing in their calling. If you don't know exactly what you're doing, call less as opposed to more. The next call that I want to talk about, and it's an important call, turkeys do it all day long. They do it very quietly close to each other to check in. It's like a contact kind of call. It's just a basic cluck. You heard me do it a couple times on the mouth call over there before I would start the calling sequence. But a lot of times, turkeys will just be walking through the woods with each other or by themselves, and they'll just be making very basic contact clucks, which sound just like this. Very soft, very quiet. So I just threw that yelp in there in the middle of those clucks, but you could kill a lot of turkeys with a cluck. Like I said, they do it very, very regularly. It's kind of like a call where they just check in on each other. It's very quiet. It's and it's a great call to use if a turkey is starting to come, has started gobbling closer to you, and you don't want to keep disclosing yourself with a yelp. A couple clucks will go a long way in terms of steering a turkey to your particular location. The next call that I want to talk about that would be important for someone going to the woods this spring is a basic purr. And so purr can be done really on any calling platform. The easiest call to do it on is that pot call, but a purr, turkeys do it when they're very, very content. They also do it when they want to fight each other. And so, like I said earlier, these calls have different meanings based on the situation in which they're being applied. But what you'll regularly hear turkeys doing, in addition to that cluck when they're close to each other, is this purr. And here's what it sounds like on a mouth call. Excuse me, that just flipped over. So that would be a basic contact or contentment purr that turkeys use when they're around each other. It's also a good call, if you can do it, to use when a turkey is finally starting to close ground and you're really being quiet. But the other form of a purr that you'll hear in the spring woods, we talked about earlier how toms will be fighting each other for territorial dominance or the right to breed. We also discussed the hen dynamics, and hens will fight each other as well. It's called a fighting purr. And you'll occasionally hear this periodically throughout the spring, but it will be a more agitated form of purr. It'll be faster. It will be more elevated in terms of the cadence and the sequence itself. And so it'll sound a little bit like this on a mouth call. So that would be a fighting purr done on a mouth call. And this is what a purr will sound like. A basic purr will sound like off a slate or a pot call. You just want to take your striker and kind of skip it across the top of the surface. And then if you wanted to make it sound like a fighting purr, you would just push your striker harder into the surface and make it faster. That'd be a fighting purr right there on a pot call. So we've covered the basic yelp, we've covered the tree yelp, we've covered an assembly yelp, we've covered clucks, we've covered purrs, and the big thing that everybody listening to this right now has seen on the Outdoor Channel is cutting. So hens cut out of sexual receptiveness. They also cut out of agitation as well. But everyone knows what a cut is if you're interested in turkeys. And cutting is something that you will regularly hear throughout the spring. Hens do it to gobblers in terms of indicating sexual receptiveness. They will do it to gobblers to encourage that gobbler to come to them. And it is certainly a call that you want to have in your toolbox as a spring turkey hunter, but it's probably the most abused call and just situationally misapplied call that hunters have. So I'm not going to say that it's wrong to cut at a turkey. I cut at a lot of turkeys. But you want to cut. For me, cutting is used as to test the waters. It's an escalation in that conversation with that bird. If I've started with a soft tree yelp when the bird's been on the tree and then he flies down and I might yelp at him or cluck at him, if the turkey hasn't started or is demonstrating a lack of willingness to move my way, I'm probably going to cut at him at some point to test him to see if that's the call that might budge him. And so what cut is, it's a high-low, rapid cluck. So I showed you the clucks on the pot call and on the mouth call, but in order to do a cut accurately, it has to be two different sound notes that are rapidly compressed against each other. You'll hear a lot of hunters, a lot of newer hunters, or a lot of hunters employ a cut in the woods where they're cutting at with the same sound, and it just isn't authentic. And as someone who spends a lot of time around turkeys, I think that having authenticity or being able to make the bird believe that you're a real turkey certainly puts you in a better position to harvest that bird. So I just want to reinforce that it is a high-low when you actually employ it in a cut. I'm going to yelp and do some cutting here for you guys to hear what this will sound like and sound like kind of in a more realistically applied way. So I'll do some basic cuts with some yelps mixed in here. So you can clearly hear the two different sound notes there, that buck, 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 buck. And that's a good example of cutting, but it also is very accurate in terms of what a hen actually does. In terms of cutting on a pot call, the way that you cut on a pot call is really very simple. You just apply some striker pressure into the pot and you pull the striker downwards. But the way that you get two notes, or you can get two notes out of your call, is you change the amount of finger pressure that you're putting into the striker. So let me try and demonstrate this. So I have light finger pressure right now. Pop. I'm going to tighten my finger pressure up. And you can hear that gives me a more shrill sound coming off that calling surface. And so when you're cutting on a pot call, you want to be manipulating your finger pressure as you're jumping to get that high, low, high, low, high, low. And so I'm going to do it slower here so that you guys can really kind of see what I'm talking about or hear what I'm talking about as I change my finger pressure, light pressure, harder pressure, light pressure, harder pressure into that striker. So here's light, here's hard. I hope that actually came through the speakers, but that's how you manipulate that sound on a pot call to get to cutting. Like I said earlier, cutting is probably the most situationally misapplied and most overabused call in the spring woods, but it is an important call to test the waters with a gobbler and encourage him to start making ground or moving in your direction. One or two cutting sequences at a turkey for a basic turkey hunter is probably more than enough to test the boundaries in terms of whether that bird wants to approach or start to move towards you or not. In terms of realism with calling, we just went through the basic calls and I would say the most important calls that are going to be in your arsenal as a new turkey hunter going into the woods this spring. But I want to kind of refocus the conversation in terms of how we apply these calls from a tactical and from a strategic perspective. I was listening to a podcast on my way back from Florida, and the speaker, the guest on the podcast, really had a very articulate way of saying this. People tend to call too much, and newer hunters, and I certainly was one of these guys. I was the worst at it for a long time. Newer hunters want to tend to say a lot to turkeys. They want to call a lot. And the guest in this podcast was talking about how it's the most fascinating thing that newer hunters want to tend to call a lot when they know the least about the language that they're actually speaking. When you think about that in terms of conversation and conversation management, it's a fascinating concept. So as new turkey hunters, I would encourage everyone that's listening to this to call much less. And remember that this is a two-part process. This is kind of, this is like chess. When you call, you are asking the turkey to do something. He has no obligation to gobble to you. He has no obligation to come in your direction. He has no obligation to leave. He has free will to do whatever he wants to do. But you, as a caller, as a hunter, are asking the bird to come to you. So you're pleading your case to that bird with everything that you say to it. So number one, I want to remind everyone: be careful about what you say. You can't unsay things. You can't retract you can't retract the things you've said in any conversation, let alone one with a wild turkey. And so, in terms of general calling strategies, less tends to be more in most situations. And I tend to like to take my conversations and engage them or initiate them at a very low level, at a minimal level, and slowly intensify the conversation with that gobbler if I need to. But everything that I do when it comes to calling, I am continuously evaluating that gobbler's response to the call. Now, it may be his actual verbal response in the form of a gobble, but silence is an important part of conversation as well. Silence is also a part of a conversation that a lot of human beings are really uncomfortable with. They're uncomfortable with silence in conversations with each other, and they're very uncomfortable with conversations with turkeys that involve silence. But when we're looking at conversation management, we need to take that and we need to apply it to what we're saying to the turkey, and we need to give the turkey time to respond. That turkey has no obligation to respond to you immediately when you make the call. He has no obligation to respond to you 30 seconds later. He has no obligation to respond within 5 minutes. But if he doesn't respond, we should be thinking, what's he doing? Could he be coming right now? Is he approaching our position? Could he be leaving us? Because really there's only 3 outcomes when you call to a turkey. He either comes in your direction, he stays where he's at, or he leaves. And once you ask the question, once you tree yelp to a turkey, for example, maybe 1 or 2 tree yelps to a turkey on the tree, regardless of how hard he's gobbling, 1 or 2 tree yelps. If he's answering you, he's recognized you as a hen. So that's an important part of what you want him to do, but ultimately you want him to come to you. And so you have called to that bird asking him to come to you, and a lot of people want to keep calling to encourage him to fly down faster or come in your direction faster. But once again, I want to encourage people to sit back and give the turkey time to respond to your call. Give him time to sit up there and gobble. Give him time to decide whether he's going to come in your direction or whether he's going to leave. Don't force these conversations into an awkward place, because I'll tell you, the more you call to a turkey, in a lot of situations, the less likely he is to come, because you've killed the curiosity element of that conversation. Curiosity, for new turkey hunters especially, has killed more turkeys than anything else in the world ever will. Silence is golden in these conversations with these birds. And so when we're talking about calling strategy and we're talking about what's appropriate, I just want you guys to go to the woods and be thinking about what you're saying. If you're on a bird on the roost and you're 100 yards from him, I want you to be thinking, should I be cutting at this turkey? And at that point, the answer is no. I want you to be thinking, should I assembly yelp to this turkey? The answer is no. What you should start to think is, well, when would this turkey fly down, and when might be an appropriate time for me to tree yelp? And the things that influence that decision are going to be, are there other hens around that turkey that are actually tree yelping? Or is he gobbling on his own and you think that he's all by himself? So the answer to that question and what's appropriate when you're going to a turkey that's gobbling in a tree and you've picked your setup, maybe you're going to tree yelp to that turkey. Or maybe you can't find a good setup and you choose not to say anything to that bird because you want to let him tell you what he wants to do and where he wants to go before you actually call to him. So there are all these factors to be considering in terms of when we're going to call, what our call selection is going to be, and then how we're going to actually evaluate the turkey's responsiveness to our request. And people tend to get lost in the fact that turkeys are gobbling. We all go to the woods because we want to hear a bird gobble. We love hearing turkeys gobble. I was terrible, not that I'm good at it now, but I was terrible at turkey hunting for a long time, and I called too much. finally read this book that said, shut up when a turkey answers you. And I started doing that. And I started killing turkeys a lot more quickly. And I started becoming more strategic about what calls I used. And I started to think about, as I went turkey hunting more, the more experience that I had, the more that I recognized what we as turkey hunters are trying to do is create a scenario that Tom or that gobbler identifies with. And it's one that he wants to become a part of. And the more realistic or the more appropriate our call selection is, the higher the likelihood that turkey is going to walk himself over like opportunity. And it's an important perspective to maintain that strategic mindset why these conversations are taking place, because I think a lot of hunters, and I know that I would get lost in calling and making the turkey gobble. And what I can tell everyone that's attending this seminar with complete confidence is making a turkey gobble is completely different than making him come. And gobbling is awesome. It's the reason that we go to the woods, but we've got to make sure that we employ this conversation management mindset to make sure that what we're doing is actually in the best interest of making that bird come. And once again, curiosity, which means minimal calling, is typically the best way to do that. We can talk a long time about conversation management with turkeys, but it's 7:58 right now, so we are an hour and a half into this thing, and I don't want to start to delve into the Seminar 2 content. So I think at this point it's probably appropriate to get into some of the Q&A. Eddie, are you good with that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, buddy, I got you.
Yeah, yep. Let's jump into the Q&A. I've been keeping track, and I will kind of read off some questions to you and let you answer them. So,
yep.
During the first part of the seminar, we had a lot of questions about locating turkeys, from seeing them in the fall while they're deer hunting. Can people, are they, what is the likelihood they're going to be there during the spring, and just generally about roosting them either earlier in the year or the night before. Just talk a little bit about that as far as locating turkeys.
Okay, so in terms of roosting and whatnot, that is all content that we're going to get specifically into during Seminar 2. Seminar 2 will be more situation-based. It'll be more time of day based from a tactical perspective. But to address the question about turkeys in the fall, the reason that the gentleman is seeing turkeys in the fall is because there's a food source there, and there's good roost habitat there. So I don't know if he's got a cornfield or a bean field, a sorghum field, some type of wheat field. A lot of farmers, this time of the year putting in, they put in cover crops. So there's a lot of wheat in the ground right now. So you'll have that in the spring before they harvest it. But the turkeys are there because of food, maybe the mass crop. In terms of acorns, there's still a lot of acorns on the ground. It was just in the woods up here, I guess maybe 7 days ago before I left for Florida. There were still a lot of acorns in the woods that weren't rotten, actually, and that mass crop will influence the location of turkeys in the fall. But I can say that typically if you have healthy turkey numbers in your area in the fall, they're going to be in that general area in the spring as well. If you're hunting 25 acres or if you're hunting smaller parcels at that point, the turkeys may be a little more random in how they move through that property and how they utilize it. But if you're hunting larger pieces of ground in terms of large access public pieces, or probably 75 or 100 acre or larger private parcels, those turkeys are going to be there more consistently. If you're a small parcel hunter, a lot of Northern Virginia guys find themselves in that situation. It just requires a lot more scouting to be able to know exactly when those birds are in there, so that you can hunt when they're there. as opposed to when they're not. I think that probably covers that fall and spring relationship with turkeys. But turkeys can have vast territories in the fall, especially in the national forest where crops or where acorn crops are localized and spotty. Those birds can cover a lot of ground as they're looking for new food sources.
What about proximity to water as far as when they're roosting? You mentioned that as that's one of their needs. Obviously, is there a general distance that they would want to set up at?
Yeah. So water is a different conversation in different parts of the state. So if you were like up where I'm at in Northern Virginia right now, you have creek networks and stuff that run, along the ridges and down in the drainages. If you were hunting more towards the tidewater, you have what most people would consider traditional swamps. So when you're on flat land and you have swamps, turkeys will traditionally roost 60 to 75 yards out in those swamps. They like to have water underneath of them. It's a safety thing. So if they have that available to them, they will absolutely exploit it. You see that all over the Southeast, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida. If there's water, they're going to have water under them on that flat land. When it comes to hardwood, more traditional hardwood areas that have contour to them with creek networks in the bottom, the water thing is more irrelevant. They're more using the ridge networks and the declines of the ridge networks. They'll run downwards on the decline as a ridge descends so that it's easier for them to get up in the trees. And sometimes they'll roost and they'll happen to be over water, but they may be on the side of the ridge that has water. They may be off the point. That just kind of is a turkey being a turkey, and there's not as much consistency to roosting over water when you're talking about hardwood habitat, traditional hardwood, rolling hardwood habitat. In terms of setup distances, we're going to get more into that in Seminar 2, but generally speaking, I think that for newer turkey hunters, you want to be out of sight of that bird when you set up on him on the roost. So you're probably going to want to be in that 125 to 150 yard range in terms of distance from the bird on the roost, and you want to set up on the same level as him or uphill from him when you begin to engage him. Calling turkeys downhill, it can be done. Everybody that's turkey hunted a long time has been forced into a situation where they had to call a bird downhill, and it worked. But generally speaking, it's a lower probability scenario, and I would only ever choose to call a turkey downhill if I was limited by property lines or some type of physical feature that wouldn't allow me to get up there. Otherwise, I will walk 2 miles out of the way and circle the bird and come around on him to make sure that I'm at least on his level or on a higher elevation than him. They're much more comfortable making a move like that.
Great. Yeah, that's great information. Just to kind of follow that.
So just to kind of to elaborate on why I'm not a turkey, but if a turkey was coming downhill and a predator were to choose to approach it, turkeys have to run to take flight. So if a predator approached the turkey as the turkey was descending, if a predator came from the bottom towards that bird, the bird would almost have to run towards the predator to get elevated. Versus when you're calling a turkey uphill, if you're above that bird and you're calling him to the crest of a ridge where you're on the same level as him, it's much easier if that bird encountered a coyote or some type of predatory surprise to turn and literally take 2 hops and fly off of that ridge and fly away from you. So it's just kind of a pretty logical thing when you're talking about a bird that is trying to avoid being eaten all day long and do some breeding in the spring every once in a while.
All right, very good. We got a So along those lines, as far as properties, this may be a little too specific, but we had a couple comments about somebody asking about a recently logged property, somebody asking about a property that had a large bobcat on it. As far as a negative sign, predator, I don't know if it's maybe just touch a little bit more on specific properties that might be generally.
Look, I mean, the only thing that's guaranteed in life is change, right? So properties get logged, they get sold, new owners buy them. You may be able to stay on the property, but the new owner has a new objective for the property, and they're going to do their thing. So turkeys are pretty adaptable animals. Logging can be a blessing and a curse. If your entire property wasn't logged and there's still roost habitat remaining, then that clear cut will be a huge asset, because the turkeys will roost in the remaining hardwoods or the remaining pines that are adjacent to that clear cut. Excuse me. And then for the first year or two, so the first year especially, they're going to fly almost right down out of the roost and go right out into that clear cut and gobble like fools to attract hens. And then when they do attract hens, they'll spend a lot of time in that clear cut as well until it gets really hot in the morning. They'll spend a lot of time in the earlier part of the day in that clear cut, because they're very safe. They can see predators approaching them from all over the place. And it's just a really good location for a turkey to be. As that clear cut, if they planted it or if they let it go, as that clear cut starts to mature for the first couple of years, there'll be some decent nesting habitat. A lot of times they'll leave lapwood, or they'll leave the tops in there, and those hens can nest in those tops. So it can be very beneficial to the turkey population. If this person happens to own that land, one of the best things they could do is get prescribed fire in there and burn it out for brood habitat. That's a different conversation. But logging preseason and postseason can be great. During the season, depending on the size of the property, if the turkeys that were going to be in that area can have a sanctuary or can go to a place where they feel safe, then those birds will remain on the property. But if they are cutting in the interior or the core of that property and there's not a lot of sanctuary left for those birds, it will push them off the property for that particular season, unfortunately. So it's going to be situational in that gentleman's circumstance. In terms of predators, look, some of the best turkey populations in the United States are in states with high predator densities. We have plenty of bobcats in Virginia. We've got a lot of coyotes all over the place. So predators are a factor of the turkey's life. Predator management obviously is a huge asset to turkeys in terms of trapping coons, possums. In the winter leading up to the spring, if you live in a county where you can trap, where coons are nuisance, you can trap through the spring and certainly give the hens a break in terms of nest predators. Bobcats are certainly voracious predators. They absolutely kill turkeys, but the fact that a bobcat is on a property, they're pretty nomadic and pretty transient. So I would not have any concerns that bobcat is going to have a significant impact on number one, the turkey population, or the quality of turkey hunting on that property. Turkey's got to gobble and he's got to drum to breed. And unfortunately for him in the spring, biology forces turkeys to do that based on, the testosterone increases. So he's going to gobble.
Hey, Kyle, do you suggest blinds?
I personally have a love-hate relationship with blinds because they completely negate a bird's visual capabilities. So my 5-year-old shot his first 2 turkeys last year out of a blind. I have started newer hunters in blinds just to allow them to have a high quality experience. But if we're having these seminars, in the interest of, number one, basic hunters and hunter improvement, which that is one of my goals, and I think should be everyone's goal, if to become a better hunter, become more skillful. I think that blinds are really great ways to introduce people to the sport and allow them to have some interactions with turkeys and become addicted to it. But I am always very cautious to encourage people to get into the blind game, because there's a lot more to turkey hunting, and it's a much more high quality experience when you're sitting there mano a mano with him in those woods, and you've given him the full benefit of utilizing his defense mechanisms to pick you out. So I don't discourage people from getting a blind. I discourage people from becoming reliant on that blind in terms of hunter development. And I'll also say that they can be a tremendous asset, for if you've really got inclement weather, and you've only got a couple days to hunt. The only way you can kill a turkey is by going hunting, but you also don't want to go and be blowing turkeys off the roost or running through the woods when they're really not gobbling much. So for rainy days, a blind is a great option, for a guy that only has Saturday and Sunday. If the weather's going to be terrible, it might make it a little more comfortable to be in the field during some of those inclement weather scenarios that you can encounter.
Alrighty. So in terms of right now, would you suggest people go out and try to locate them in the evenings? If you see them, if you're finding them now, is that a good potential bet that you can go back there when the season starts?
So I think that if you were going to scout, if a brand new hunter was like, I want to go turkey hunting this spring, I think the more time you spend in the woods, the better off you'll be. The more time that you spend in those woods thinking about what's this going to look like from a turkey's perspective, if I'm calling to them, where would I set up here? Those are all valuable conversations for a new hunter, especially, to be having, and also to become more familiar with the environment and the habitat that you're going to be hunting in. So I would never discourage anyone from spending time in the woods, because every time that you go to the woods, you're going to be learning something, and you should be putting that into your toolbox and aggregating that information so that when you're on a hunt, you can use it to influence the decisions that you're making and constructing a strategy, and ultimately leveraging it to become, have a higher likelihood of success. But, we're at March, what is it? It's March 9th right now. The turkeys haven't really busted up very much at all. My brother just saw a couple turkeys strutting for the first time in the last 2 days. So there's a chance that those turkeys will still be in the general area that they're in right now in 2 or 3 weeks. But there's also a chance that those turkeys could go to a neighboring property or could really bust up and not spend much time there. So if you're going to go into the timber now, I would be going into the woods scouting now with a different perspective in terms of just trying to learn that terrain, see where there's currently turkey sign, maybe listen for turkeys. But the real value, if you're going to go and you're trying to put ears on turkeys and turkeys that you're going to hunt, you need to start scouting probably about March 25th. So that would give you that would be 2 weeks before the general season opens. It would be 1 week before the apprentice weekend opens. And what I mean, the reason that I'm saying this is because, look, the more recent the information that you're collecting, the more valuable, the more applicable that information is in terms of the hunt that you're going to be conducting. So scouting is important, but The scouting that's more recent or closer to your hunt is the most valuable information that you can have, because you can take that information from the day before and say, okay, they did this, or they did that, or they did this, and then they did that. And you can apply that information to your strategy the next morning, or you can apply it, 2 days later. If you're not going to get to hunt the next morning, maybe you're going to go 2 days later, 3 days later. You just have more nuanced and more recent information that allows you to formulate a more a better strategy.
Okay. Are you going to address more of the decoys at the next session, or did you want to talk a little bit about decoy placement now?
Yeah, so we can. I was going to talk about it in the next one, but that's not a complicated one. We can I can hit it now, and we can mention it. So, what specifically is the question about decoy selection, Eddie?
So one of the questions we had was basically, we had a couple questions about, do you use decoy, or do you need to use decoys? What does the setup look like? Just generally placing them and how to use them.
Okay. So most people these days are going to be running a 2 decoy setup if they run decoys. So I don't hunt decoys that often anymore, but that's just a personal decision kind of in where I'm at with my turkey hunting. I used decoys off and on as a kid. You'll learn more about setting up on turkeys by not using decoys, but for a brand new hunter, I would encourage you guys to use decoys. And I would encourage, most people are going to buy a Jake decoy and they're going to buy a hen decoy. Obviously the intent is to frustrate a gobbler by allowing the gobbler to see that the Jake has gotten to the hen. That triggers, territorial responsiveness. The gobbler wants to come in and beat up the Jake, and you'll see some phenomenal stuff, some really cool stuff over decoys in terms of aggression and fighting and vocalizations. And there's some really cool stuff and some cool experiences to be had by using decoys. So generally speaking, I think the default is to use 2 decoys. If you've had a chance to scout, your decoy selection is really going to be based on what you've heard with scouting. What I mean by that is, if you've scouted and you've watched your turkeys, for example, or you've heard your turkeys and you know that there's a dominant gobbler there that runs a lot of other Jakes or Toms off, then certainly using a Jake would be a great strategy, because you know that that's a dominant bird. He's very territorial, and you know that as soon as he sees that Jake decoy, he's going to respond aggressively and come running in. So it'd be a really logical strategy. If you have some subdominant Toms that you see, for example, that have gotten beat up by a lot of Jakes. We have a lot of Jakes in the woods in Virginia this year because we've had really good hatches. Sometimes you can have really big Jake numbers that will beat up the Toms, and the Toms won't want to gobble very much. So in those situations, if you've had the opportunity to do your scouting, you wouldn't put out the Jake, because you know that if you're calling a gobbler in and he comes in and sees a Jake, he's already been beat up extensively by that Jake. He's probably going to turn around and walk away. He's got a quick exit strategy out of that situation, and so it would not be favorable for you to use. Most people are not going to have the ability or the time to have that degree of familiarity with their turkey flock. So they're probably going to default to putting the Jake out and putting the hen out. My advice in terms of decoy setups, if you're going to run that, particular configuration there, would be to have the Jake decoy at 25 yards, no further than 25, and I wouldn't bring him in tighter than that, 20 or 25 yards, and you want that Jake decoy facing you. But also facing away from the direction that you are anticipating that bird from coming. So when you're making your setup, you've heard a bird gobble, you're going to point the decoy away from the gobbler that's gobbling at you and facing in your general direction. And so the reason that you do that is because if you face that Jake decoy in the direction of the Tom that's gobbling, and that bird comes in, it's a very aggressive position for that Jake to be in, and that Tom could become, or that Longbeard could become really insecure by the aggressive posture of the Jake and turn around and walk away. Whereas if you, when a turkey fights, most of the time what they do is they want to come around the back. And so if you face that decoy away from the gobbler, where you face it towards you, you can be relatively confident at that point that you have given the bird that's approaching the ability to see that Jake and then approach him from the rear if he wants to be aggressive in that approach. In terms of the hen, I like to keep, toms and hens vary their distance from each other for a reason, in terms of how close they're going to be for breeding versus as a tom just kind of loafing. So I personally like to keep the hen further away from the Jake if I'm running that situation, because it seems to give the impression that the hen is actually less interested in the Jake. And at that point, that should give that tom a little bit more confidence to come in and confront that Jake, because even the hen doesn't really want him there. The other benefit to having that hen off of the Jake is it doesn't restrict your shooting area. If you put that hen close to that Jake and that bird comes in, you may find yourself in a situation where the two decoys are really obstructing a good shot at that gobbler. Whereas if you move that decoy, I like to think of a triangle, essentially with the Jake being the furthest tip of the triangle and the hen closer to me or closer to the shooter, but wider off at the angle, so that I've given that guy, that client, that guy, whoever, that kid, the ability to maximize their shooting field when that gobbler responds. I don't think there's any benefit personally in having the decoys tighter on each other. There's a lot more problems that you can create for yourself or for the shooter by doing that.
So during the calling section, we had a lot of questions. I want to circle back on a couple of them. I think you addressed a lot of these in terms of if a turkey gets spooked easily if you're not calling correctly. Calling less is definitely your main point. So just rapid fire here. I'll just kind of go down the list. How effective are push button box calls?
Really effective, and probably in addition to to the box call that we talked about, honestly, a push pin is the easiest. That's my mistake. A push pin would be the easiest call for a new turkey hunter to go grab and be effective with.
What about a gobbler call and the prime uses for those?
Yeah, so in terms of public land hunting, you really want to hunt defensively, and a gobbler call can be used effectively for turkeys, but it also sounds like a gobbler, so it can bring other hunters to the party. So my recommendation, if we're talking about public land and gobbling or gobbler calls, is probably that they're not the best idea. If you're hunting on public land or on private land, when it comes to gobbler calls, you really want to be sparing in your use of the gobbler call. Essentially with a gobbler call, what you're trying to do is create a scenario where you're using a hen call and a gobbler call to make the gobbler that you're calling to jealous or make him angry from a territorial perspective. So it's not a call that you want to use right off the bat. It's probably not a call that you want to use on your first or second time when you're dealing with that particular gobbler, because it can make or break the situation. If you gobble at a bird that is not the dominant bird in the area or is not really feeling very confrontational on that day, it's really easy for that turkey to stop gobbling and just say, to heck with this, and leave. I have seen them work. I have certainly gobbled at plenty of turkeys and killed them, but most of the time that has been from scouting. I've watched those birds run off other toms. I've watched those gobblers run off other jakes, and I know that I'm dealing with a turkey that is particularly territorial, particularly aggressive, and very dominant. And so I I employ that gobble very, very strategically and very judiciously for certain situations. It is not. It certainly would not be my first option or a play that I would make as a brand new hunter. You know, on my first or second time going in to hunt a farm. It definitely not.
All right. Do you have any suggestions on using calls without giving away your location through movement, and somebody that wants to get started with a mouth call, how they can kind of start with that?
Yeah. So let's go to the mouth call thing first because it's the easiest one to address. So there is a DVD series out there called Mouth Call Magic. It is hosted by a competition caller named Scott Ellis, highly decorated caller. And he produces, I think it's Mouth Call Magic 1 and Mouth Call Magic 2. They were certainly both very helpful DVDs for me when I was trying to improve my mouth calling and kind of take it to a new level. The basic sound that you want to make into a mouth call is the hiss. If you can hiss like a cat, that is the basic vocalization or the basic airflow that you're going to create a yelp off of. Scott Ellis in the Mouth Call Magic DVD series goes into different ways to huff air. People have different ways of calling effectively. Some guys like to think about, or some guys and girls like to think about how to bring their air up from their lungs. For me personally, I start to think way too much about it at that point, and it's easier for me to call from a phonetic perspective. So when I'm calling on a mouth call, essentially when I'm yelping, I think of saying yeep, 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 yeep. When I am clucking on a mouth call, I literally say buck, and you'll feel the air in your lips load up and buck into that call. When I was purring on that call earlier, if you can gargle like Scope or Listerine, the best and the most authentic way to purr is with your vocal cords, which is the same way that you gargle with Listerine or Scope. You literally, and that will bring that air up with those vibrations over those reeds. So for me, calling with a mouth call is very phonetic. And I learned that the hard way because I started to try and think about how I was bringing air up out of my diaphragm, and my diaphragm started to lock up. I was just thinking too much about my calling. And, I run goose calls and various calling platforms. And what I realized was that for me, you don't think about pronouncing phonetics. None of us as kids, we learned to say, to make the sound A and B and and B. And I started to realize, it's like, I don't know why I'm thinking about my lungs so much in this when I can just think about making sounds and get what I want out of the call. So different strokes for different folks. But that's the way that I do it. If that person wants to reach out to me directly, or if you want to give them my contact information directly, Eddie, I'll be glad to work with them or try and give them as much help as possible. But those Mouth Call Magic DVDs would be a really, really good start. There's also a lot of good content on YouTube regarding how to run a mouth call. There's a guy named Shane Simpson. He has a website and a YouTube channel. I think it's called Calling All Turkeys, and he's got a lot of extensive mouth call content there. So YouTube is kind of an oyster. The Mouth Call Magic 1 and 2 are really good content as well. And I'll be glad to help out in any way if I can as well for that person. In terms of calling, and what was the question about moving and calling, Eddie? Can you run that one by me again?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just strategies to minimize movement when you're calling. So you don't.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So my first response to that, number one, is that you should not be calling to a turkey that you can see. Especially when we're talking about basic introduction stuff. I just saw a question from Jonathan Hathaway about Blaze Orange. No, Blaze Orange does not have any place in the spring turkey woods. When you're talking about an animal that sees full color, you could certainly, maybe put Blaze Orange flag out the back of your turkey vest if you wanted to while you are moving. Or if you shot a turkey, I think they have some Blaze Orange bags that you can throw a turkey in. But in terms of the setup, Blaze Orange is not gonna help you kill turkeys. That's for sure. Back to the movement thing. If you see a turkey, you should not be calling to that turkey because that turkey can see you, and he can see you better than Blaze Orange is not a legal requirement in Virginia when turkey hunting. It's a legal requirement in Virginia when hunting with a muzzleloader or a firearm or a center fire rifle. But there's no requirement for Blaze Orange in turkey hunting in, I don't think, any state actually currently. But anyhow, back to this moving conversation. The turkey can see you really well if you can see him, and at that point you really want that bird to be finishing to you. And if you're calling to him, when you call to a turkey, you stop it. The turkey stops, he looks around, he thinks about it, he might gobble, but every time you call to a turkey, you are stopping forward progress. So we should think about it like that. In terms of turkeys that may be barely outside of eyesight, I like to set up, very, very low on the tree with my gun up on my knee, and I can hold a pot call if I need to in my left hand and just run the pot call really, really low. You're going to want to be really quiet if you're in a situation when you're calling to a turkey that's close to you. So I would just, different folks like to sit differently on trees. I like to get really, really low and have my left knee up in line with my right shoulder so that my gun can be in my shoulder and sitting on my knee the whole time. So I never have to pick up my gun off the ground or anything like that. I literally am just ready to go the whole time. But he's going to have to figure out the best way to hold the call based on the way that he sits, essentially. But a mouth call would certainly be a better alternative so that movement wouldn't be an issue at all.
Well, we have a lot of questions we're probably not going to get to tonight. I think we're at our 2-hour mark, so I think now's a good time to close it out. Did you have anything else to say before I kind of concluded everything?
No, I think we got up to like 150 on the attendees or something. I certainly appreciate everybody coming out, and I really hope that this was valuable, and that somebody took something from this, and just makes them more successful and have not even more successful, but just have more quality interactions with turkeys. I don't want to judge success by killing turkeys, but helps everybody find turkeys, hear turkeys, and really have a fun season with them. Eddie, if you want to fire me over, if you want to copy and paste some of those questions in an email and fire them over to me, I can try and address them individually, and we can try and get them back to those folks with a response if that's possible. But I appreciate everybody's attention. I appreciate the attendance. I certainly appreciate the engagement in terms of the number of questions that came in. I'm going to try and construct the second seminar to utilize a lot of scenarios that will be more relatable to people so that they will have some familiarity with what they're experiencing in the woods this spring based on the conversations that we're going to have in the next one.
Fantastic. Yeah, we for everybody that's still on, I'm going to send out an email later this week with a survey, some more follow-up information, and don't forget to sign up for next week's seminar as well, part 2. Same time, next Wednesday. You do have to register for that separately. It's on the same place you registered for the first seminar, but I will email that out to everybody as well. But yeah, thank you so much, Kyle. That was fantastic. I think somebody said they took 2 pages of notes, so that's a good sign.
I love that. I love that.
All righty.
All right.
Well,
I'll look forward to seeing everybody next Wednesday. Eddie, I appreciate your time and everything you've done to facilitate this, man.
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle. Thanks everybody else.
All right. Good night, guys.
All right.